This week marks the first time ever that an ex-head of state is being tried for genocide in his own country's national court. The trial of former US-backed Guatemalan dictator Efrain Rios Montt has just begun, and it raises big questions of how to balance the desire for justice, even revenge, with the need for victims to move on and not dwell on the past. Reid, just remind us, for people who weren't familiar with Latin American history in the 1980s, what the genocide in Guatemala was.
Well, in Guatemala, there was a civil war, or more appropriately, the U.S.-backed military government of Guatemala unleashed during many years a policy of what was called a scorched earth policy against the highland Indians. Almost 200,000 people were killed during the war. And during the worst part of that war, the part that's under trial right now, the government of General Efrain Rios Montt is alleged to have committed genocide, to have identified the HPL Indians as people who supported the small rebel groups.
And how did this court case come about then?
Well, like the other ones, it comes about largely through the tenacity and the perseverance of the victims. People who, despite the terror that was visited on them, have been fighting for 30 years. This took place 30 years ago, have been fighting for justice. People who, and particularly in Guatemala, in a country where people who fight for justice are themselves turned into victims. And we've seen judges and lawyers and victims killed with alarming frequency. These people have told their stories again and again. They've taken people to the sites of the graves. They've identified, and the very...
Sorry to interrupt, but just legally speaking, why is it unusual that a country would end up prosecuting for genocide its own former dictator? I was just surprised to hear that this was the first time ever anywhere that this has happened.
Well, fortunately, genocide doesn't happen that often.
Okay, I mean, that's the upside.
There have been a number of other countries that have put their former leaders on trial around the world, fortunately. But genocide, is a case in which actually the government decided that one of their own national groups, in this case the HPL Maya Indians, should be eliminated as such. They weren't, not because they were leftists, but because they were HPL Maya Indians.
Right.
And so that's what makes genocide, particularly rare, fortunately, but also it makes it so unlikely that the country itself is going to try a former leader. And in this case, it really took the human rights organizations in Guatemala and a very brave public prosecutor who is there now, Claudia Paz, who, on the backs of all that work, said, okay, nobody is above the law, we're moving this through.
Jorge, you were there in Guatemala at the time. Can you just tell us your experiences?
Yes, I was at the time there. I was a student of San Carlos University. And like he was saying, all this repression against the indigenous was going on in the countryside of the country. But also in the urban side, all the student movement started joining in order to talk about or express all these atrocities. Because of that, and then the government started going after students and union leaders and also political figures there were talking about against all these abuses. One of the reasons why I came to the United States was because our lives were in danger, and I feel that I was going to be easily killed just because being a student from this public university.